I just want to say that this event is hosted by the Swarthmore Project for Eastern European and Eurasian Relations. This is the second annual lecture series titled Activism under Totalitarianism. And we are extremely pleased to have a member of Pussy Riot speaking with us today. So this speaker series is a continuation of last year's lecture titled Tomorrow's Europe, in which we heard from two writers, a Ukrainian poet, a Russian academic, and a United Nations representative about how nationalism has retaken the continent, about its culpability in the global climate catastrophes, and about the continual persecution of the queer population across the region. This project was started in 2018 after I came back from filming a documentary about the war in Ukraine with Daria Matisco, who is fortunately sitting in the audience today. We saw the remnants of the 1 million families that have been displaced by the conflict. We heard the stories of the 10,000 innocent young men and women who have been killed by it. And we saw Ukraine, my home, in ruin. Because a global order has perpetually acquiesced to Russian aggression in the region, from Chechnya to Georgia to Crimea. This project is an urgent call to action and attention before the rest of Eastern Europe and Eurasia succumbs to similar fate. Nadezhda is here to speak about what it is like to act in times of crisis, be punished for it, and grow more empowered because of it. She is a founding member of the feminist punk collective Pussy Riot. In 2011, Pussy Riot began staging unauthorized guerrilla performances to promote gender equality, LGBTQ rights, and opposition to Vladimir Putin. In 2012, Nadia was convicted of hooliganism motivated by religious hatred after being arrested during a performance in Moscow's Christ the Savior Cathedral. After nearly 2 years in a prison labor camp, she has continued creating protest music. Along with fellow Pussy Riot member Maria Alyokhina, she founded Zona Prava, which provides legal defense and counsel to those threatened by unlawful action taken by corrections officials, investigators, or judges in Russia. She was named a prisoner of consciousness by Amnesty International and received the LennonOno Grant for Peace in 2012, as well as the Hannah Arendt Prize for Political Thought. She will be interviewed by our one and only Jose Vergara, assistant professor of Slavic languages and literature, and hands down, one of Swarthmore's most brilliant and inspiring scholars. Also, please make sure to attend the second lecture of this series on October 28th, when we will be hearing from Masha Gessen, a staff writer at The New Yorker. Woo! Exactly. And she's the inspiration for the title of this series. She wrote a book, The Future is History, How Totalitarianism Reclaimed Russia. And of course, we have to thank our sponsors. This will be as fast as I possibly can. Thank you to the William J. Cooper Foundation, the President's Office, the Provost's Office, the Sager Series, the Urban Inequality and Incarceration Program, Swarthmore Libraries, the Lang Center, the Bryn Mawr Department of Russian, and the Swarthmore Departments of Russian, Modern Languages, Theater, Music, Gender and Sexuality, Philosophy, English, Global Studies, and History. Without further ado, please welcome Nadezhda Tolokonnikova.
So I hate to kind of start on this dour note, but I really need your help, Nadia. In your book, you devote a chapter to taking back the joy, kind of celebrating protests, celebrating politics, not, letting it get you down. But in the face of climate catastrophe, cultural stagnation, corruption of all different kinds, all these terrible C words, I'm curious how you actually find joy in what you do. Are you an optimist by choice or by nature?
First of all, lately I found a really good thing. It's a fish oil. It really helps me to go through a lot of terrible things in my life, because I've been reading about stuff about fish oil, so it's actually natural antidepressant, and we don't have enough omega-3 in our diet. So lately I'm keeping up because of fish oil, and all my friends are like, you went nuts. You're just like some kind of Illuminati right now, because I see people who I haven't seen for a couple of years, and I'm like, by the way, do you eat fish oil? But it really helps. It does elevate my mood, because naturally I'm really predisposed to having depression. I mean, not naturally. I started to be predisposed to have depression after I went to prison for 2 years. And before that, as like everybody else, I had problems with my mood sometimes, but nothing serious. But I was diagnosed with depression the year I got out of prison, because in prison I obviously didn't have time to think about like, why am I depressed? It's not easy to be in an elevated mood when you have to face so much shit. But I think it's so prison to me became a model of life itself in a way, and that's a unfortunate thing to say, but yeah, that's how it is. So in prison you're fighting every day for getting back your life in the face of so much terrible news every day. It's not just about you, it's about people around you, and mostly like it's created by hands of authorities, like everything like in real life, right? And you know that you can escape for it, but you cannot really, because you are in the hands of idiots. And it's really frustrating. But the thing that helped me to go through prison, and more than that, to be effective. When I was in prison, and by being effective, I mean like keep being an activist, keep raising issues, like about prison conditions and writing open letters about it. So I was fighting for every day in my life, and I wanted to keep it meaningful. I thought that it's government job to take this day from me. They want to make my life miserable, meaningless, and basically when you're in prison, they say that these years are taken away from you. But my goal was to make every day and every hour in prison for myself meaningful, though I knew that I'm in the most restricted conditions. I don't have voice effectively, and my hands are tied down. But I think it's a good metaphor about times where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Talking about the prison experience and what you went through in Reading Riot, this book, which I highly recommend.
Thank you.
You do reference kind of this long tradition of artists who have gone through similar experiences, being jailed for their art or for speaking truth to power. Shalamov, Solzhenitsyn, Gorbachev, Figner, so it's a long tradition. Pre-Soviet, Soviet, post-Soviet, all of them. So I was curious, how important was this tradition for you at the time or afterwards, looking back? How do you fit yourself into this tradition as a Russian artist fighting power?
I think growing up in Russia, you just naturally immersed in this tradition. At least it was true for myself, and you're reading Dostoevsky in school, and you have to learn about his history, and he was convicted with going against government and Russian Orthodox Church, and he was convicted to death, but he ended up being just sent to prison camp, how we would call it today. So obviously you start, like, when something like so similar, like even when it comes to the things they accuse you of, it's so similar, and you're just so mad that nothing really changed in like 1.5 centuries, and it's still the same. I was always fascinated by people who had courage to go through jail. And just because I was in political activism, I was surrounded by those people. Like NPP, it's a party/movement that was founded by Eduard Limonov, who is Russian writer, artist, and later he became a politician. And I'm not in any fashion in line with their political views because they are anti-Kremlin, but at the same time they are homophobes and like lots of other terrible stuff. But I've been studying philosophy with a guy who used to be in this movement, and he had to spend a year in prison. He was facing like 20 years, but then they dropped most of the charges, so he spent like 1 year. And though like our political views were not in line, I was really amazed by his courage, and I always like asked him, so how is it to be in prison? I was curious. Even when I was a kid, my grandmother lives right across the road from the prison. And I remember being a little kid, I was like, that's so interesting, like what's inside, Granny, I'm so curious, can we help somebody to escape from this jail? And then they brought me there, and I was kind of happy, because like when you are in Russia, it's just prison is a part of your narrative every day.
And I know after your release, as Roman mentioned, you founded Zona Prava, visited many different prisons and countries in the prisons there. So I was curious what differences you noticed in people's attitudes towards prisoners or prisons. Not even necessarily the buildings themselves, but the way we think about prisons.
Yeah. I think important thing to understand is that it's always a choice and a conscious choice to treat the prisoner like another human being, because like we all read about this psychological experiment, right, about prisoners and prison guards. So it's just natural, unfortunately, for us to start being assholes when we know that we have power over somebody. That's why we should never give absolute power to anybody, because it just corrupts you, and absolute power corrupts you absolutely. And that's what we witness in prison. It's basically like a small totalitarian society inside of authoritarian state. That's how it looks like. That's prison in Russia. And they are so happy about, like, people who work there, at least like 10% of them, they are sadists. Like they're really turning on feeling that they have absolute power over you. And I had endless conversations with my prison boss when he would just invite me to his office and just enjoy having absolute power over me. And he would tell me things like, maybe you do have some influence, maybe you do have some supporters, but they're all outside, and here you're absolutely alone and nobody will help you. And here is just me and you are in complete control of mine. And he would, I think that's a kind of, that's not normal, right? Like he would invite me every day to listen to this bullshit for hours, and I couldn't say no, because if I say no then I would be put in jail, inside jail, which is solitary confinement, SHIZO, we call it. In order to overcome this kind of attitude, what we needed is to put people not from military, not the cops, but people who care about other people, like people who are humanitarians and people from their, social workers. And we need to make them to be in charge of our correctional institutions, and then maybe we have a chance to change something. I saw it being done with a former Stasi prison in Berlin. We went to see how it is right now, and Stasi, it was one of the most terrible places on earth, but they, like Germans, they seem to really learn their lessons. Russians don't for some reason. And they put a former prison abolitionist in charge of this prison, and that's how I think it should be done. And he didn't want to be head of the prison because he was like, prisons should be ruined. and the government was like, yeah, that's why we want you to be head of the prison. And we had a tour inside of prison, and we had a chance to talk with prisoners one by one, like without the presence of prison officials. And we talked with people in Russian, like some people from Russia, from Lithuania, who could speak Russian. They were able to talk with us. So like the reason why I'm saying it, because it means that our conversation was completely confidential, and because the guards could not understand what we're talking about. And I asked them, like, what's your biggest complaint? Like, what's your problem? And they told me that, it's really terrible. It's really terrible what's going on here. But like they promised us to give us internet for 2 months, and they still didn't do it. I'm like, yeah, cool, yeah, that's inhuman. Yeah, but and then I asked them, how do they deal with prisoners who fall in love with each other? Because I had this story in prison, and a girl was who I was for just a quick second. She ended up being punished because of me. She ended up in solitary confinement. So when she got out of the solitary confinement, which is a cold, terrible shithole, and you don't want to be there. It's like the most terrible place inside of prison, which is terrible by its own. So I asked them, I was curious, like, what do you do if people want to be together? And they were like, oh, just write an application and we put them there to live in the same room. I'm like, wow, that's really human, but that's how it should be, right? But it seems really fantastic for me as a person who went through Russian prison, but I see that it could be done. And really interesting part to me was to see prisons in Estonia, because you can see how people actually work on prisons. Because, like one thing, you go to prison in Scandinavia and it's like, it's like my apartment, basically. So you look at this and you're like, oh my God, like we would never get there because it's just so far and it is so boring. But when you go to Estonia, you can see actually how they're actively work on stuff, because they're not as far as Norway or Sweden, and so we've seen some prison camps and they're trying to rebuild their dormitories, and they're trying to actively work on this stuff to make them accountable for a way how they treat prisoners. It's not always easy. I mean, like a lot of officers, they're just really angry because they're like, we've been doing this job for years and now you come and tell us how to do it. But life stuff.
You have to start somewhere, and often from the outside. One of the striking things in your narrative and many other of these prison narratives is the joy or the positivity that you can still pull out of this experience, the growth and the learning that you get out of prison. And Solzhenitsyn famously said in the Gulag Archipelago, "Bless you, prison, for having been in my life." Striking, controversial statement. So I'm wondering, given what you've written and how you feel, the things you've been saying, do you agree with that sentiment? And then, either way, can you think about prison in positive terms without somehow justifying the system, this repressive system?
I think you really need to understand Russian soul in order to understand what Solzhenitsyn was talking about, because Russians are big on getting enlightened by sufferers that they have to go through. And like when he says about it, it's not about him justifying the system, because he definitely thinks that the system is absolute evil, but it means that you can purify yourself and you can learn something about human nature by going through hell which is truth. I mean, that's the basic idea of Christianity. And we are Russians, just even if we're secular, we're still like really influenced by this idea. We're not hedonists by any chance, you know. And I was excited about going through that experience when I just ended up in jail. Like, I mean, I was suffering. That's being said, it doesn't mean that I wasn't shocked and everything, but I was like, wow, that is like an experience of spiritual growth it's really difficult for me to get in the outside world because I have so many distractions. And so now I can actually see like what I'm capable of as a human being. But again, I'm not advocating for you to go to jail, because like, you definitely can access this, you know, this growth through more human tactics like meditation, or you can actually travel to monastery, like Buddhist monastery, as my friend did recently, and he had the best experience about it. So yeah, you don't have to go to jail for it. But I'm on the side of Shalamov in the conversation between Shalamov and Solzhenitsyn, because Shalamov said that you actually can grow in jail, but prison camp, labor camp is an ultimate hell on earth. It's something that corrupts human soul, that cannot, by definition, makes you better, because it teaches you how to become a rat, how to become like utterly unethical person, because that's the main job of the prison officials. They try to control you through the hands of prisoners by themselves. So basically, it's like Thomas Cobb's paradise. Like he would be really happy. Like he would be like, yeah, I was right. But yeah, it does look like humans are like wolves to each other in prison, because solidarity is not really existent. It's quite different though in male and female prison, because strangely Russian criminal culture that is mostly based on male experience is a really good antidote to the power of their prison officials. And that's why, just historically, because women could not be part of criminal culture. They were, basically they were or like wives or girlfriends, that's it, but they've never been really inside of it. Or, they've been actually, but they were not accepted. That's why we don't have this antidote in female prison. And that's why it's much easier today to be in male prison. You can have phones often. You can choose if you want to work or not. So you can wear sometimes your own clothes in male prison, but it's nothing like that in female prison, because we didn't have alternative hierarchical structure to oppose the prison officials. But we need to build it, right?
I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk a bit about different forms of activism we've taken part in that are taking place in Russia. But just generally looking back at the last decade or so in Russia, there are these waves of protest starting roughly around the time of Pussy Riot's performance in the Cathedral, all the way up to the summer, some bigger protests as well. So looking back over this decade, what changes have you seen in Russian protests and activism?
There have been protests before 2011, but it was the time when it became more or less visible for Westerners. But we are taking part in protests since 2007, and I mentioned before this movement was the NBP movement, and I think they're first political actionists in this century. They started basically to wake up after Putin's second term, 2004, and in the end of 2011, it was the first time when thousands, like hundreds of thousands of people hit the streets and started to tell for the first time that we need to have fair elections. But that protest was it was killed pretty effectively, unfortunately. So we went to prison thinking that our country will change, and when you're in prison, even if you follow the news, even if you have your relatives and lawyers coming to you, you don't feel their air, like what's going on. And so we were really shocked. I think I became really depressed, not just because of prison, but because of their murder of protests that happened through those years when we were in jail. They just opened a number of political criminal cases, and people were like, oh yeah, we don't want to lose our job, we don't want to lose our status. So they just decided to become silent. And the media were destroyed. Most of the independent media were dismantled. So people just started to feel themselves like powerless, disorganized, atomized puppies who cannot really control the situation in their own country. But things are really changing right now, and I believe because of the power of alternative institutions that we started to build, because we learned our lesson that we can be atomized really easily. But so after 2012, people started to slowly organize themselves into this alternative structures. So like medias and activist organizations, and just we have a special organization that helps people who ended up in police departments over the info, who ended up in police departments as a result of protests. And I don't think it's something that really, like you can see often in different countries. Like, wow, Russians are really big on self-organizing when it comes to protests. Because within a second, like we deliver food, we deliver water, and we provide lawyers to everyone who found themselves in police station. No one goes to police station and being forgotten. It's always like a mob outside asking to release this person, even in a situation when over 1,000 of people is detained. And like we have 150 police stations all around Moscow and outside, and sometimes they bring protesters like 2 hours from Moscow, and like still dozens of people go there and stand there and they spend the night there demanding the release of these people. And it's been really great, and I think like that's the lesson that I learned from it, that we should build alternative institutions. So basically just coming back to old DIY ethics. So when you cannot participate anyhow in official system, then you just build your own, but don't just complain that the official system doesn't work. I mean, you still should complain, because like, why not? Like, yeah, that's our universal human right to complain. But at the same time, try to build something that will work, and like be sure that those people who are in power, they will try to ruin it. They will try to put like sticks in your wheels, and they're doing it with us all the time. But yeah, we personally built 2 organizations. First one is a media outlet that became really successful these days. I mean, like successful in a way that a lot of people read us. And we report about like the least sexy topics ever. We report on police departments, on political cases. We make online reports from the courts, and it's called Media Zona. And we started it in 2014 when we got out of jail, and we realized that, whoa, our country is not the same anymore. It's like all the independent media are killed. And I was like, I used to read Gazeta.ru and Lenta.ru, and when I got out of jail and I opened them, like, it's so terrible. Like, they're all praising Kremlin now because just like they were wiped out, and they knew people came to these offices, and it's still called the same, but it's not the same. So we decided that we have to make our own media outlet. And yeah, basically we traveled around the world, just taking donations from like all sorts of organizations and festivals and universities, and we put it all in Media Zona, and now it's like a grown-up baby, it's like a teenager already.
Was it modeled on any particular media, or?
No, and it's been a team that was around for a while.
Yeah.
So, like Sergei Smirnov, who is an editor-in-chief of Media Zona, he used to work in Gazeta.ru, that media that I used to read, and they were really nice. But like since our government started to censor them, he had to move to another place, which was called Russian Planet. And then when like the biggest attack on Russian media happened because of the situations in eastern Ukraine and because of annexation of Crimea, because Putin could not tolerate any criticism, so he made Donald Trump's dreams about journalists come true. He fired them all. He killed them. He beat them to death. Like, yeah, a good number of them. And yeah, in that situation, we just linked with Sergei Smirnov, and they're like, hey, do you want to start something completely new? And he was like, yeah. And our motto was like, real politics today is in police departments and in courts in Russia. And when we just started to make it, everybody else around was just laughing at us, because they're like, oh, nobody will read it. It's like, it's not interesting. It's not, in this era of clickbait, it's just kind of, it's impossible. Like, who would want to read about tortures? And, but turned out that we actually were able not just to grab existing audience, but to build our own and to grow up, new generation of activists who are on the streets protesting right now.
Mm-hmm. So one issue that I'm really, invested in, fascinated by, and I know you are, I'm sure many people are here are as well, is environmental issues, environmental activism. One of your recent videos, Black Snow, is devoted to coal mining and the effects, environmental and health issues in your hometown of Norilsk and Siberia more generally. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the state of environmental activism in Russia, what's being done to combat misinformation or apathy, what's going on with that particular issue.
People just recently, in the mainstream media, people just recently started to recognize that environment issues are real issues, and I remember I was really shocked when a few years ago I came to Echo Moskvy. Echo of Moscow it's an independent radio station in Moscow, and they treat themselves as progressives. And I came there and I just mentioned something about climate change, and they started to laugh at me. They're like, do you really believe in these fairy tales? And I was just like, I was speechless, because that's people who claim that they are progressives. But in the last few years, things are changing really fast. And I think amazing activists like Greta Thunberg really made a good job to wake us up. But still, even my close friends still in Russia, they don't believe that climate change exists. But I think it will change really rapidly, because everybody have access to internet right now, and it's just like people can read real investigations. So I think it's something about, we've been concerned with different issues. In the last decade, we've been concerned with us being murdered and slaughtered in streets and being silenced, so we didn't really have a chance to think about in other issues, but it's changing. It's changing. And environmental protests, like a protest in small village actually of Shias, became a federal issue, and I think for me it's a sign of the time. It's a sign of this age, because it started as a small issue, And the story is Moscow want to bring their garbage to this small village in Arkhangelskaya Oblast. Arkhangelskaya district?
Yeah.
Arkhangelsk? I don't know how to translate it. But yeah, like 10 years ago, nobody in big cities would notice it. Nobody would care about it. But right now, it became a big like point in almost every federal mainstream media outlet in Russia. So I think things are changing. But yeah, talking about Black Snow, I'm from Norilsk. It's one of the most polluted cities on earth. So that's how I came to activism, partly. I came to activism through feminism and through environmental issues, because it was something that we just could not ignore, because the snow in my hometown is literally black. I mean, it's like normal when it falls down, but in 30 minutes it turns gray, and in 1 hour it turns black, which is nasty. And rivers in my hometown sometimes turn red, and like when I say red, I mean like really like blood red. But nobody is being held accountable for it, because we are mono town, mono city, and everybody who lives there is dependent on their factories that are surrounded the city. But I believe that it will change soon, just because people are waking up.
Certainly when it starts affecting them. And I'm sure you saw these reports, I think last year, of black snow in a different city being painted over with white. Black snow, it's a literal cover-up of white
in
black
Russia?
snow. Yeah, in Muisky, so in Siberia. Which,
I'm surprised that they did it. So the thing about Russia is that normally officials don't really care about stuff like that, because they live in Switzerland.
Okay. Well, the snow is white there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in those fancy places, but I've seen pictures.
So I'd love to keep talking, but we definitely want to leave time for audience questions. So, and then I'm sure we can all get over to the performance soon. So let's open it up. And we don't have a mic to pass around, so you'll just have to speak very loudly. Saw a hand.
Stand up.
Yeah, stand up and enunciate, please.
So my name is Daria, and in your correspondence with Slavoj Žižek, which we read last semester in Professor Vergara's class, the two of you discussed whether there existed a chaos or anarchy meaningfully separated from capitalism as opposed to merely appropriated by it. As a student organizer last semester, I tried often to preserve my radical beliefs, politics, and practices. But when media began to pay attention, even on a small scale, they chose a narrative and easily appropriated my actions to make them palatable, easy to consume, and profitable for their news agencies. Have you felt that fame and visibility have given you more freedom to preserve what you described as the Dionysian? Or have you felt that it has led to a watering down of your politics when they are retold by those with power?
Being invisible, you mean a mask?
Sorry?
Being invisible, do you mean a mask, or?
No, I mean like visibility through media giving like news stories and films and anything that gives you more fame when people pay more attention, and it's CNN telling the story as opposed to your own like book.
Yeah, so is your question do I experience it as a bad thing that's happening with us, or like I'm just like when it comes to English, like you talk with me like a philosophy student, and I'm like, hey dude, take it easy. I'm just like, we need things to be really simple and really clear.
Yeah. So when someone else is describing your politics, as opposed to you saying it yourself, do you think that they modify it in a way that makes it less radical in any way?
I mean, we're all interconnected, so we live in a culture, so it just will happen with you anyway. But I guess as an artist or politician or activist, you should be aware of that it will happen at some point. CNN will report on you. And I mean, that's basically what you want, right? There's like CNN is reporting on people like Greta, and that's amazing. That's what we want. I'm not against mainstream media, but you want to be more or less in charge, and you have to predefine that mythology, more or less. I mean, like when I go to CNN, I always think about like what bomb I can drop there, like so, or it just comes to me naturally. So like my friends really enjoy when I say things like, oh, you know, authoritarian ideologies are spreading out the world as sexually transmitted diseases right now. So when I say it on CNN, they're just like. So you always find a way to have fun, or like we're friends with Lawrence O'Donnell, and once in a while I'm on his show, and like sometimes I say things like, "Oh, they don't give a flying fuck about it," and then he doesn't stop it. He's supposed to stop the how do you call it, the air, and he's supposed to tell to people, "Oh, I'm sorry that this bitch just say this word. I'm deeply sorry for all of you, American nation." But yeah, he doesn't do it because he wants to be mischievous too. So, I mean, that's just silly examples, but there are examples of like how you try to remain radical in a context where you are, like understanding the context. Or like when we went to speak in Harvard, there was a case where a guy was actually former student of Harvard. He finished the university, but he was not able to enter their university anymore because he came back once as a protester, and he protested against them hosting a guy who supported Putin. And so he stood up, like he just did, and he was like, "Hey, I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm here today. I'm just letting you know that they're, expelled people from this university because of political reasons, the same as in Russia." And what we did later, after our lecture, we followed him, and he was taken to police custody because he stood up and he said that he's not supposed to be here. And then what we did after, we were supposed to go to some dinner with students, but instead we invited those students to go with us to police station because, if you really want to know what Pussy Riot have to tell to you, it's not particularly about dinners. It's about helping people who are in troubles because of stupid authorities. So just be being sensitive.
I just heard that Russia is joining the Paris Climate Accords, so Putin has changed his mind. Do you know anything about that? Do you know how the press is covering that in Russia? What
I don't know. I'm not really big on reading press, honestly. And that's another thing that really keeps me sane. So I'm just trying to get the most important things that are happening, but I'm usually getting them from the news later than they happen because I cannot be in news cycle all the time. I feel like I'm going insane. And to preserve my sanity, I just have, I would rather read a book on, on systemic inequality. I would rather read Piketty than CNN or Guardian even. So yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't know the news. Who should pick? I should pick you.
How have your experiences with everything that's happened in Russia changed how you feel about Russia as a home and a place where you've come from?
I always knew that shit could hit the fan. I remember even making some photos a few months before I went to prison, and I was like, oh, I look kind of pretty on these photos. I want them to pick these photos when I will be in jail. And Funny fact, that actually did. So, yeah, but I didn't know that I'll go to jail. It's just like some just general feeling. So it did not surprise me a whole bunch. But it definitely, I changed my perspective of Moscow a little bit when I saw it from there. When you're in a police car, you can just see your hometown through like a small hole because you're not supposed to see where you are. So you're trying to find this, like you want to see real people, because somebody, but not prison guards. But yeah, I think that experience changed me a lot and made me think more about our history, about like why don't we learn any lessons from our history? Like we're a country who went through big terror not that long time ago, and right now we have politicians praising Stalin again, and that's so weird to me. This is an absolute evil guy who killed his own citizens and for the sake of nothing, like I don't know, for the sake of effectiveness or whatever. Yeah, so it just made me want to learn more about our history, just to be sure that we will not repeat our mistakes. Mm-hmm. Yes, you.
Hi, I'm Suchen. I'm from China. And as an international student from China, another totalitarian regime, I guess one thing I realized is that it's very hard for Americans to, for an average American to understand how brutal this totalitarian regime can get.
Yeah.
I mean, in China, the government is jailing like millions of Uyghurs.
Or even for like, think about Canadians. I just came from Canada where I had the talk.
Right.
And it was just like, it's a completely different world.
Yeah, exactly,
you cannot explain.
Exactly. But the ironic thing is, people back home, they're like, the propaganda machine of these totalitarian regime is so strong to the point that where like pretty much all the people are brainwashed. They all buy in like what the government tells them. They don't believe like what's being reported here. They don't believe in the fact that the government is building concentration camps like in this northwest province. And I find it very deeply frustrating to talk to my peers who buy in like the propaganda produced by the government. So I'm wondering, like, how do you convince people who are like so brainwashed by the totalitarian regime, and how do you overcome this hopelessness, knowing that you're fighting such a strong enemy that's so hard to defeat?
Mm-hmm. Spreading information, I think, is the only one tool, and I don't always have. I mean, just naturally, I'm an introvert, so I don't always have courage in me to actually talk to actual people. So my way is to make art, and my way is to create news stories and manage this media outlet to give people a chance to see another part of the story. Also, I don't really like to preach. I think example and just giving information, giving truths, giving option to look at this truth is the best thing ever. Amazing fact about our media outlet that actually it's been quoted often by pro-Kremlin news agencies, because even they know that we can be trusted. So they may not agree with our point of view, but they quote us because they know that we're not liars. About hopelessness, I don't know if you have this phrase here, but we do in Russia. Like you should just sit on the riverbank and like see how your enemy's bodies will pass you by. So it's been my strategy for a while, and it actually does help. I noticed a big change in people's attitudes, and I think partly because of their more and more this alternative media outlets start to pop up, and young people tend to read the internet. They read, so we have Telegram. I don't know if you know about Telegram here. It's like an app where you can read the news, and it's pretty safe actually. So like the government cannot really have access to Telegram. So the more and more young people actually get news from there, and it cannot be controlled. Our government realized it at some point, and they tried to block it in on the whole territory of Russia, but they could not because they're idiots. They don't know how to work with internet. They ended up blocking their own website. Yeah, it was hilarious. So yeah, I feel like that person who's just sitting on the riverbank, because I'm like, all of a sudden I have all these amazing young people coming to me and being like, oh yeah, actually because of you I became a feminist. I'm like, really? Wow, that's insane. But yeah.
After the Soviet Union fell, there was this brief moment where there were like hopes for democracy in Russia. If Putin's government were to fall, what do you think that you could hope to see Russian society do differently so that there isn't another authoritarian government that comes after?
Oh, I hope that, I mean, and I hope it not just for Russia, but for this country too, that we will witness more democracy and just more than one or two parties at power. And I think we gotta investigate electronic democracy, and we gotta find ways how to protect this electronic democracy from being eroded by trolls and hackers. I definitely think that we should involve much more direct democracy, because we have all the tools to have it, but we still pretend that we live in 19th century, that we do not. And like, why do we elect people who represent us only for like once in 4 or 5 years? That just seems insane to me. Because maybe in 5 years we will be all replaced by robots. Like, how on earth? Like, we should be much more flexible. We should be much more involved in politics. And like, people think that I'm actually a crazy person when I say it, but I think a word activism should be like, we should be done with this word, because everybody should be an activist. Like, every citizen should be an activist, and then it will mean that we don't need word activist anymore, because it will be just a citizen, right? And yeah, that's what I envision for Russia, and I hope that we will have, like, in the meanwhile, because before we're going to this bright future, we will have just a normal parliamentary democracy, where we will have lots of parties being represented. And I see that we have people with lots of views making alternative parties right now. They're not represented in government anyhow, but we definitely have more than 1 or 2 parties. And you know, some of those who I hate, like libertarians, but you know, they have their right to exist too.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more.
Here.
Okay. My name is Sophie. I'm actually from Moscow, Russia, and I'm a student at Harvard. It's fascinating to have you here. I wanted to ask for your opinion on the current event that's like happening right now. What do you think should foreign governments do in response to arrests associated with Moskovskaya Dela, with arrests that happened in response to meetings that happened on July 27th? What should be done about that?
I mean, like, for example, America, like Donald Trump. What should Donald Trump do?
Just in general. What
Yeah.
should be the response? What can be done?
Just talk about it. I think, like, when I remember when we were in jail, it was really amazing to see Angela Merkel and Cameron. Yeah, they were asking. It was the first question that they asked Putin, like, "What's up with Pussy Riot?" And it really makes them mad, and it really makes them rethink. I still think that pressure from inside the country is the most effective one, and that's why, like, all these rallies and all this piquete is like one person rally when you just stand outside of the government building. So we've seen a lot of them recently, and most of the people from this Moskovskaya Dela are released right now. We still have people to fight for. That being said, pressure from inside is super important, but yeah, just, I don't know, get on their nerves. Don't forget about political prisoners. Don't don't forget about things like annexation of Crimea, because like I'm so mad that all the foreign leaders, they're like right now they act like nothing happened really. But yeah, I mean some years passed, but that's what exactly Putin wants. He just wants to, just have it under the carpet, but just keep it on the table, talk about it. But I'm not a big supporter of sanctions. I think it really just irritates. It irritates us. It ruins our economy in a way that it affects our economy. I think if we talk about sanctions, it should be sanctions against particular people. That's why I'm a big fan of Magnitsky list that targets their evil people from our government institutions who actually are involved in murders and corruption. But not like, I'm not a supporter of sanctions against economic sectors. Because like for Russians, I know even like a lot of my friends who are like super progressive, they're annoyed. Because like, why do they have something to say about our economy? That's our economy, that's our choice.
Since your art and your, I know you don't like the word, but activism are so entwined, I'm just curious, like, how you continue to find joy in the art making that you do when it can be so, like, affected by what it's resisting. If that makes sense.
I mean, like, real reason why I'm against, I'm not, I think word activism is useful, but it's just like, it's a little bit takes responsibilities away from people. So like, we somehow split the world in people who have to act because they're activists and people who don't have to act because they're not, but it's not my worldview. That's why I think we had so many problems. Like, like we don't have enough AOCs because people don't really, they're not ready to take this responsibility on their shoulders. And I'm so amazed because you're not going to prison here because you want to be elected. Yeah? You're not beaten for the most part, but. Yeah, this strikes me. But anyway, art and activism, I feel like it's being therapeutic for me. So like I'm depressed often because of terrible political events that I have to face all the time. But if I can actually come up with simple steps that I personally can do in order to oppose it, like all of a sudden I'm not sad anymore, but I'm actually happy and energized because I'm like, yeah, I can do some things, yeah, that's cool. So and art helps me because like once I was thinking, for example, about like I just want to cut my veins, like I cannot live anymore because of so and so, and I was like, I will make a music video about it and make organs where I'm in this bloodbath. But yeah, I think it's not a new thing, like art always been a therapy.
So let's go see what that looks like in Upper Tarleton.
I'm not going to cut my veins on stage.
No blood of any sort. Please join me in thanking